the work that we do is exactly inspiring and preparing young people to succeed in a global economy. So I could not have been in a happier forum. I've got two questions. I think, Kevin, you spoke about the disconnect between the skills needed and education. James, education is a process of creativity, thinking out of the box. Now, does it call for a bigger role that companies can play in involving with the education? Because exactly to the point that Vickers made, right now education most of the time is a lifelong profession, which means by definition there is a disconnect. The second question that I have is actually about taking risks, because you talk about encouraging young people to take risks when they are young. How about corporations? Are you being entrepreneurial with your policy? Are you taking risks?
Yes, we are. We're taking risks in recruiting the people that we're getting, and I lost my thought for a while. Anyway, maybe the other people.
James?
At our group, we are focused not so much on the risk-taking, but more on the needs in the society that's not being met, and how we can meet those needs, build values, and get people to come in to understand those needs and be willing to do things differently, work very hard. And so it's not just about taking risks. It's actually, there's some science in it. There's some science in it. So, go ahead.
No, James.
Yeah, so yes, it is a lifelong learning process, but you've got to have the tools. You've got to have the master key. And it does not come automatically. It comes through proper education. It comes through the proper culture, the proper philosophy, things that we learn at home and so on.
The idea of getting business closer to schools on a regular basis is very appealing. Because I think one of the issues with everybody operating in these parallel universes, the educators, the youth, and employers, is because each is distant from the other. If we can get business people, as Vikas said, into schools talking about what it is to be in business, if business is clear around the skills it really wants, that can only be a good thing. At the end of the day, though, business has to run a business, so there's a limited amount of time. But I do think this notion of being clearer around the skills that employers need, and then working back from there, is something that's not happening enough. I mean, business does have a role to play here. I mean, part of it is shouting loudly and being clear on what's needed, and that's why science and technology and all that go with it, those courses aren't getting the prominence they need, and they need a bit more prominence, because that's the set of skills business keeps looking for and doesn't find.
So in the UK, we actually have sponsor schools through our academies program, and they have a large input into what happens in that school. I think that's a very positive thing. I think to your point earlier regarding collaboration, I think it was the point you raised. At this event last year in Myanmar, we had a session with Daw Aung San Suu Kyi during the Young Global Leaders program, and I asked her a question in terms of, given where Myanmar is at the moment, where do you see the education priorities of her country? And I was expecting an answer such as science, mathematics, we want more kids to be able to calculate. She floored me by saying that actually what we need to do and prioritize is the spirit of teamwork in our children. Now that plays to a question, that plays to a greater question. There's, at Davos this year, John Chambers actually said that 80% of the jobs in the next 20 years are not yet created. So how do you prepare your workforce for the future, apart from giving them a foundation of phenomenal values? And that's where I think families, schools, and governments have.
On the element of taking risk, actually, I think I agree that actually people have to make these choices, and not everybody is an entrepreneur. But I think we also need to distinguish between voluntary entrepreneurship and involuntary. And when I say that, I guess what I mean is that, like, the point raised earlier between, like, different economies, in periods of crisis or in periods or situations wherein you have no choice but to risk. If you can't find a job, if you don't have if you don't get the right opportunities, you're not going to take it just lying down. You're going to have to take a risk. So I guess in that sense, if you can't get employed, then you have to make do. And I guess, and that's what I would call involuntary entrepreneurship because you're forced into it. And I see that a lot in our work, but if I were a fresh graduate and I can't find a job, what would I do? And then I'll be forced into a situation where that could be involuntary entrepreneurship, not necessarily by choice. And I think like areas like who encounter challenges and obstacles, you're going to see more and more of that, and maybe that breeds creativity, and maybe that will breed entrepreneurs.
Next question. I'll come here soon.
My name is Kumar, K.S. Kumar. I just wanted to touch 2-3 points that is covered here.
Just one question, please, because there are quite a number of questions out there.
All of the important questions, I thought. One of the things you talked about the government, and of course, somebody in the business said it's not a good idea to involve government. The question was, how can government, and you asked about the Silicon Valley idea, how to bring it to Philippines. The question was, how do you create an environment of entrepreneurship, innovation, right? There's places you make, like making a startup village. How do businesses collaborate with the governments to create a startup village for young people to come and innovate in one common place to collaborate, right? The young people of today, born after the 80s, are a different kind of people than the entrepreneurship as understood earlier. So how do you mentor them, coach them, support them to bring it all together, and how can government and businesses come together to create those kind of collaborative, culture of entrepreneurship and create an environment to collaborate?
Thank you. Anybody for that question? How do you create an environment of entrepreneurship, collaboration between the government and the private sector?
It's the government's responsibility. The whole community's responsibility, but the government should take the role in creating an environment of good governance. That means the institutions must function efficiently. Things must be transparent. There should be minimal red tapes, bureaucracy, because those are the things that is a hindrance towards more entrepreneurship. The other part is financing. A lot of them, if they do not have financing, a lot of the ideas just won't fly.
There's a long history of government getting things wrong in terms of trying to innovate on behalf of its population, so we should recognize that. I think government can create a framework, though, within which entrepreneurship and innovation can thrive. For example, if you look at some of the things Singapore has done over the years in terms of creating incentives, creating a tax environment that favors business, creating vocational schools that actually allow people to get some basic skills, and doing it in a geographic area where they can get some scale, that can work. So government's role, I think, is to create a framework. I'm a bit hesitant about whether government really wants to dive into the business of innovation, but it can create a framework.
Well, I have a very unique experience on that, just to quickly build, because my co-founder actually went to government. So we actually have a social entrepreneur, my co-founder, going to government. Of course, we've had to separate ways, so there's no political connection now here, but I guess his experience as a social entrepreneur in Hapinoy is exactly the perspective he brings in. And I think that does two things. One is really creating a framework really for micro enterprises, which is our advocacy, to really thrive. And he's created that policy and framework to encourage that. And I guess on another point, because when we were building out this enterprise, we had very scarce resources. So he also has to navigate that. And I guess takes that entrepreneurial spirit navigating now that is no longer in social enterprise.
Question about, the back, please. Could you stand up, please? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Yosef. I'm a global shaper from the Auckland hub in New Zealand. I'd like to thank James for bringing the point of wisdom. That is something that I think is very important when we think about education, but is not talked about much in the education space, entrepreneurship, creativity. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts around how we can incorporate wisdom in the way we train and develop people to be citizens and contributors to the global economy.
I guess each business can have training for their own people, and perhaps that will be creating a generations of more skilled people for for jobs beyond that particular business.
I think when you look at wisdom, you think about knowledge plus experience equals wisdom, in my view. And when you think about that, I think education systems and schools impart the knowledge, but it's the experience side of it that I think lacks quite drastically and that we have to address.
Over here, please.
Good afternoon. I am Tony Lopez from Business Asia. I'm tempted to ask, why do we need entrepreneurs? In a developing country, we need entrepreneurs to create jobs and reduce poverty. In a rich country, we need entrepreneurs to improve the quality of life and solve problems and make people, very few people, very rich. Why do we need entrepreneurs? But there's no question that we need education. So the problem is improving education, not having more entrepreneurs.
Thank you for the comment. Anybody wants to respond? I will take the next question, because that's more a comment.
But I agree that the key is actually the education. And so this education, if the end, well, again, it really depends what's the end of education. So the question becomes, who owns the child? If education is only training them to be rich and happy, then that's a problem you've got. But if education is to bring them to focus and develop their biggest talent and understand that life is about a calling, then you've got a good foundation for the kind of things that I think you're talking about.
I'm afraid we've really run out of time for questions. Thank you so much for participating. But before we conclude, I'd like some takeaways from the panelists, and perhaps we can start with Mark.
Yeah, I mean,
what's the key takeaway from today's discussion?
well, for me, it certainly really is that there is a link between education and entrepreneurship, but at least in our perspective, they can reinforce each other. But I guess in the informal sector, entrepreneurship breeds itself.
What I take away is the ecosystem that is led by the role model that we so crave to see in schools. If there's one thing that I'd say to all business leaders and all those assembled here, is actually go to a school, give your time, because I think there's no better service that you will do.
Kevin?
I think a couple of things. Entrepreneurship cannot be taught. It can be inspired, it can be experienced. And I think how you bring that experience.
What actions would have the most impact, you think?
I think the biggest impact is people, when they realize it's something they personally can do, because they've seen someone they can identify with. This is not about film stars. This is about people that we can relate to and identify with. And the more you can make it personal, the better. So a business person who goes to a school, a mom from a small community who opens that store that you're talking about, an individual that can be within reach, that's what creates the role models that this country and other countries in East Asia need. It's a very practical sense. And the reason we need entrepreneurs is because we need individuals who people can relate to and who can inspire other individuals to do great things. And great things, there's no finer thing than to give somebody a job that is value added and takes a whole raft of people from subsistence living to living at a higher living standard that grows and continues. That's what entrepreneurship is. And just to rely on government to do that, I'm not so sure. We need entrepreneurs, and that's what this conversation, I think, has reinforced.
I think entrepreneurship is an option for people who take the regular jobs and for people who, but you need educations to make you think, to make you think of whether you want to take that options or go to corporations or government.
James?
We've had so much progress in Asia over the last 30 years. And yet, if we're honest and look at the other side of the coin, we've got so much problems. We've got so much gaps. The rich, the poor, educated, uneducated, people that are healthy, people that are not, and so on. So it is a real threat whether the current growth is really sustainable. But I think we need to go beyond that to say that this is actually an opportunity, an income opportunity. If we can get income mobility with the right kind of education and training and the right kind of environment, then it is going to be really an opportunity.
I guess on that note, we can summarize today's discussion. Education, of course, holds the key to nurturing entrepreneurship and, of course, job creation. But the education is not keeping pace to what the economy needs. There's obviously a skills gap, which needs to be addressed, not just by the government, but also the corporations, which can incorporate SMEs, even students, into their businesses. Companies can play a part by incorporating startups in their supply chains, make innovation part of the DNA, and hopefully that would help encourage entrepreneurship and give jobs to those who need. On that note, please join me in thanking James, Tessie, Kevin, Vikas, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us today.
And that was our coverage of the Education, Entrepreneurship, Employment Nexus. I think there were several key insights that came into this, but before that, we will take a short break. Please stay with us.